The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered for an emergency session. The massive dome-shaped hall, built from crystallized starlight and suspended in the void between three red giants, had witnessed many historic moments, but none quite like this. Ambassador Zixathara of the Calarian Empire adjusted her bioluminescent fins nervously as she reviewed the datapad in her webbed hands. The statistics were impossible to believe, yet they came from the most reliable intelligence networks in the galaxy. In just 50 cycles, a single species had somehow managed to turn the tide of the Devourer War, a conflict that had been steadily consuming civilizations for over 3 centuries. "The session will now come to order," announced High Arbiter Veltar, his massive crystalline form pulsing with authority. The elephant-sized being's voice resonated through the quantum field that connected all present minds. "We are here to discuss the recent developments regarding species 7834 Gamma, designation human." A collective shiver ran through the assembly. Even speaking the name seemed to carry weight now. Zixathara rose from her aquatic chamber, water streaming from her sleek form as anti-gravity fields caught the droplets. "High Arbiter, with respect, I must protest this emergency session. We're discussing a species that achieved spaceflight less than 2 centuries ago. They barely qualify for provisional membership, let alone—" "Ambassador!" Veltar's interruption caused harmonic vibrations that rattled the chamber's supports. "Perhaps you haven't reviewed the latest battlefield reports from the Kepler 442 system." The holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing a star system that had been under siege by Devourer forces for nearly a decade. The alien entities known only as Devourers were living weapons, biomechanical monstrosities that consumed planets wholesale, stripping them of all organic and mineral resources before moving on. They had never been defeated in conventional warfare. The display showed footage from 3 days ago. Zixathara watched in stunned silence as human vessels, crude, angular things that looked more like industrial equipment than warships, tore through Devourer bioships with horrifying efficiency. But it wasn't their technology that made her gills flutter with fear. It was their tactics. Where every other species had tried to minimize casualties and preserve their forces, humans threw themselves at the enemy with reckless abandon. Their ships rammed into Devourer vessels, detonating nuclear charges at point-blank range. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they continued fighting in environmental suits with primitive chemical projectile weapons. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Trex, his insectoid mandibles clicking rapidly. "No species fights like this. It goes against every survival instinct." The display shifted to ground combat footage from Kepler 442b. Zixathara's secondary hearts stopped beating as she watched human soldiers, their average lifespan barely a century, their bodies soft and vulnerable, charged directly into Devourer ground forces. The aliens towered over them, possessing natural armor and weapons that could slice through modern military vehicles. Yet somehow, the humans kept coming. A human soldier appeared on screen, his primitive projectile weapon destroyed, one arm clearly broken. Instead of retreating, he pulled out a small cylinder, removed what appeared to be a safety mechanism, and threw himself directly at a Devourer war form 3 times his size. The resulting explosion eliminated both the creature and the human. "By the cosmic threads," breathed Ambassador Quillix, her tentacles recoiling in shock. "They sacrifice themselves willingly. How is this possible?" Admiral Kesavar of the Centauri Defense Force, a massive reptilian being covered in ceremonial scars, leaned forward in his hover throne. "I've been monitoring human communications during their battles. Their soldiers don't see it as sacrifice. They call it doing their job. When one of their vessels was overwhelmed by Devourer boarding parties, The captain's final transmission was, "Tell my kids I love them," followed immediately by initiating their ship's self-destruct sequence. 300 devourer bioforms were eliminated. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Every species present had faced the devourers and had been forced to retreat, abandoning entire star systems. The standard galactic protocol was to evacuate planets in the devourer's path and hope to mount an organized defense later. No one had ever considered staying to fight when victory seemed impossible. High Arbiter Veltar's crystalline form dimmed to a somber blue. "There's more. Show them the Titan Station incident." The hologram shifted to show a massive space station, one of humanity's first major off-world constructions. It was a crude thing by galactic standards, all right angles and visible welding seams, with enormous solar arrays that looked like afterthoughts. A devourer hive ship the size of a small moon was approaching, its biomechanical tendrils already extending to begin the consumption process. The humans had 12 hours to evacuate, Admiral Kesavar explained. Every other species would have taken their essential personnel and fled. Do you know what the humans did instead? Ambassador Zix Thara found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What?" "They evacuated the non-combatants and turned the entire station into a weapon. 40,000 humans stayed behind, converting their agricultural domes into bomb-making facilities, their manufacturing centers into ammunition plants. When the Devourer ship attached its feeding tentacles to begin consuming the station's resources, the humans detonated the entire structure." The display showed the explosion, a brilliant flash that outshone the local star for several seconds. When the light faded, both the station and the hive ship were gone. 40,000 sentient beings, Counselor Trex clicked mournfully. Gone in an instant. But they took the hive ship with them, Admiral Kesavar replied grimly. That single action prevented the consumption of 6 inhabited worlds in the adjacent system. By any mathematical analysis, it was the optimal strategic choice. Ambassador Quillix's tentacles writhed with agitation. Optimal, perhaps, but what species makes such calculations with their own lives? It's unnatural. That's exactly the point. High Arbiter Veltar's form pulsed brighter. We've been fighting the Devourers for 3 centuries using traditional warfare doctrine. Preserve forces, minimize casualties, retreat when necessary. It's logical, sensible, and it's been completely ineffective. In 50 cycles, the humans have eliminated more Devourer forces than the rest of us combined managed in 300 years. A new voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Dr. Melvin, the galaxy's leading xenopsychologist, emerged from his observation alcove. His species, the Watchers, rarely participated directly in council sessions, preferring to study other races from a distance. His appearance caused several ambassadors to shift uncomfortably. "I've been studying human psychology since they achieved faster-than-light travel," Dr. Melvin said, his voice carrying an odd harmonic that suggested he was simultaneously speaking in dozens of languages. "Their neural patterns are unlike anything we've encountered. Where most species have evolved powerful self-preservation instincts, humans seem to have developed equally powerful group preservation instincts." The holographic display changed to show brain scans, crude human imaging technology, but clear enough to make the point. Look at these neural activations. When faced with threats to their group, human brains literally rewire themselves, suppressing individual survival drives in favor of collective protection responses. They don't overcome their fear. They transform it into something else entirely. Ambassador Zixthera studied the scans with growing unease. "Are you saying they're naturally programmed for suicide missions?" "Not suicide, sacrifice," Dr. Melvin corrected. "There's a crucial difference. Suicide is the ending of life due to despair or hopelessness. What humans do is calculated sacrifice for strategic benefit. They view their individual lives as acceptable losses if it means protecting something larger than themselves." Counselor Trex's mandibles clicked rapidly. But surely this is an aberration. No species can sustain such behavior patterns. Actually, it appears to be accelerating, Dr. Melvin replied, causing another uncomfortable shift among the assembled representatives. As word of human tactics spreads through their population, more volunteers step forward for high-risk missions. They call it honor. We might call it madness. The display showed recruitment centers on Earth and human colonies throughout their small territory. Lines of humans, young and old, male and female, from every ethnic group, waiting to join what they called the Freedom Fleet. Look at their faces, Dr. Melvin instructed. No fear, no reluctance. Many are actually smiling. Admiral Kesevar's scarred hide rippled with what his species showed as deep concern. In all my years of military service, I've never seen anything like it. When my forces retreated from the Vega system, we followed standard protocol. Evacuate all personnel, preserve military assets for future operations. When humans were forced to retreat from the Procyon system last month, they left behind volunteers at every defensive position. Volunteers? Ambassador Quillix asked. Small groups, sometimes just a single individual who stayed behind to delay the Devourer advance. They had no hope of survival, no possibility of rescue. They stayed because someone needed to buy time for the evacuation ships. Admiral Kesevar's voice carried a note of something approaching awe. The last transmission from Procyon Defense Station was a human named Martinez, singing something called the Star-Spangled Banner, while he manually operated the station's guns. High Arbiter Veltar's crystalline form shifted through several colors before settling on deep amber. This brings us to the reason for this emergency session. 3 days ago, the Devourer Command Collective changed its primary target designation. The chamber fell completely silent. Every representative knew what this meant. For 3 centuries, the Devourers had followed predictable patterns, always moving toward the most resource-rich systems, consuming everything before moving on. Their targets were chosen based on mathematical efficiency, maximum gain, minimum resistance. They're not targeting resource systems anymore, High Arbiter Veltar continued. Analysis of their movement patterns shows they're heading directly for Earth. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Ambassador Zixthara felt her bioluminescent patterns flickering with shock. But Earth is barely a Class C resource world. Why would they? Because they're afraid, Dr. Melvin interrupted. For the first time in recorded history, the Devourers have encountered something that threatens their existence, not through superior firepower or technology, but through sheer, inexplicable determination to fight. They've identified humans as an existential threat. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If the Devourers were changing their fundamental strategy to target a specific species, it meant they viewed that species as dangerous enough to warrant complete elimination before pursuing other objectives. How many Devourer forces are moving toward Earth? Asked Admiral Kesevar. High Arbiter Veltar's form dimmed to nearly black. Everything. Every hive ship, every bioform, every resource they can spare. Intelligence estimates suggest a force equivalent to what consumed the entire Andorian sector. The mathematical reality was stark. Humanity's total population across all their worlds was barely 8 billion. Their technology, while innovative in application, was still centuries behind galactic standards. Their space fleet, even including every converted civilian vessel, numbered fewer than 10,000 ships. The force heading toward Earth could consume entire star systems. Ambassador Zixthara's aquatic chamber cycled nervously as she processed the information. What response are the humans organizing? Surely they're planning evacuation procedures, refugee settlements on neutral worlds. They've refused all evacuation offers, High Arbiter Veltar replied. Every human world, every colony, every space station has voted to stay and fight. All of them? Counselor Trex's voice was barely a whisper. All of them. confirmed Dr. Melvin. "We intercepted a transmission from their Global Defense Council yesterday. When informed of the approaching Devourer force, the human representative's exact words were good. Let them come to us. We're tired of chasing them around the galaxy." The chamber erupted in startled clicks, hums, and bioluminescent flashes as representatives struggled to process this information. No rational species willingly faced extinction-level threats. The logical response was always preservation of the population through strategic retreat and dispersal. Admiral Kesevar's scarred form straightened to its full, imposing height. "I've fought alongside humans in 17 separate engagements against Devourer forces. They don't retreat, they don't negotiate, and they don't surrender. When faced with impossible odds, they smile and ask if anyone has more ammunition. But they can't possibly believe they can win," Ambassador Quillix protested, her tentacles writhing in agitation. "The mathematical probability of success against a force of this magnitude is essentially zero." "That's the thing about humans," Dr. Melvin replied, his harmonic voice carrying an odd note of something that might have been admiration. "They don't fight because they believe they can win. They fight because they believe fighting is the right thing to do. Victory is secondary to the act of resistance itself." High Arbiter Veltar's crystalline form began cycling through colors more rapidly. "This brings us to the critical question facing the Council. Do we intervene?" The question hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Galactic law was clear: no interference in conflicts between non-Council species and extragalactic threats. The Devourers existed outside normal diplomatic channels, being barely sentient bioweapons rather than a true civilization. Humanity's provisional membership status meant they had no claim to Council protection. But the implications of human extinction went far beyond legal technicalities. "If we lose the humans," Admiral Kesevar said slowly, "we lose the only military force that has successfully engaged Devourer fleets in direct combat and won. Their tactical innovations, their psychological warfare capabilities, their complete willingness to accept casualties that would devastate any other species, these have already changed the strategic balance." Ambassador Zixthara found herself speaking before she realized it. "You're suggesting we need them?" "I'm stating a fact," Admiral Kesevar replied. "In 50 cycles, humans have accomplished what 3 centuries of galactic military doctrine failed to achieve. They've made the Devourers afraid. If that capability is lost, we all return to our previous strategy of hoping the Devourers consume someone else before they reach our territories." Counselor Trex's mandibles clicked in rapid succession. "But at what cost? Allying with humans means accepting their methods, their casualty rates, their complete disregard for conventional wisdom regarding acceptable losses. Their acceptable losses have saved more lives than any other military strategy we've attempted," Dr. Melvin pointed out. "The evacuation of the Rigel colonies was successful only because human volunteers held defensive positions long enough for the transport ships to escape. The Draconis mining operation survived because a human cargo captain chose to ram his ship into a Devourer feeding tentacle instead of fleeing to safety." The debate that followed was unlike anything in Council history. For the first time, representatives found themselves arguing not about resources, territory, or diplomatic precedents, but about the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Did civilization require the preservation of civilized methods, even when facing an enemy that recognized no such restrictions? Could the galaxy afford to lose the only species that seemed capable of matching Devourer ruthlessness? Hours passed before High Arbiter Veltar finally called for order. "The decision before us is unprecedented. We are being asked to formally ally with a species whose military doctrine violates every principle of civilized warfare. whose casualty acceptance rates would be considered genocidal by any other standard, and whose strategic planning appears to be based on mathematical impossibilities. He paused, his crystalline form shifting through the entire spectrum before settling on pure white. And yet, they are winning. Ambassador Zix Thara realized that her bioluminescent patterns had been unconsciously mimicking the colors of human military insignia, blues and reds and whites that somehow seemed more vibrant than the subtle pastels her people normally preferred. The realization was deeply disturbing. "What are you recommending, High Arbiter?" she asked. "I'm recommending that we prepare for a choice that will define the galaxy's future," Veltar replied. "In approximately 40 cycles, the largest devourer force in recorded history will reach the Sol system. If current patterns hold, the humans will not retreat, will not negotiate, and will not surrender. They will fight until every ship is destroyed, every weapon is exhausted, and every human is dead." The chamber was absolutely silent now. "If they lose, we lose our most effective anti-devourer force and return to 3 centuries of strategic retreat. If they win, we will be forced to acknowledge that everything we thought we knew about warfare, about acceptable casualties, about the price of survival, has been wrong." Ambassador Zixathera felt the weight of the decision settling on her like the pressure of deep ocean water. "And if we intervene?" "If we intervene," High Arbiter Veltar replied, "we become complicit in methods that will haunt the moral foundations of galactic civilization for generations to come. We accept that sometimes survival requires abandoning everything we consider civilized." The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone expected, but the math was undeniable. Humanity represented the galaxy's best hope against an existential threat. The Council would prepare for intervention, ready to deploy the largest fleet in galactic history to support 8 billion humans who had already decided they would rather die fighting than live fleeing. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out to prepare their respective fleets, Ambassador Zix Thara remained in her aquatic chamber, staring at the tactical displays that showed devourer forces converging on an unremarkable yellow star. Somewhere in that system, humans were preparing to face annihilation with what they called grim determination, and what the rest of the galaxy was beginning to recognize as something far more terrifying: hope. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display with the calm focus that had earned her command of humanity's largest battle group. The holographic projection showed what any reasonable military analyst would call a hopeless situation. Over 2,000 devourer bioships approaching the Sol system, their organic hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Facing them was the entire human defense fleet, 847 military vessels ranging from massive dreadnoughts to converted civilian transports, supported by hastily armed cargo ships, mining vessels, and even luxury yachts whose owners had refused evacuation orders. The math was simple and terrifying. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station, "we're receiving transmission from the Galactic Council fleet. They're requesting permission to join the engagement." Chen glanced at the long-range sensors showing nearly 300 alien warships holding position at the edge of the system. Ships from dozens of species, representing more advanced technology than humanity had ever seen assembled in one place. It was the largest galactic military force in recorded history, and they were asking permission to help defend Earth. "Tell them they're welcome to watch," Chen replied, her voice carrying the dry humor that had become trademark among human military commanders. "But this is our fight." The alien ships maintained their distance, following protocols that had been established over 3 centuries of careful warfare. They would observe, possibly assist with evacuations, but would not engage until absolutely necessary. It was logical, sensible, and exactly what Chen had expected. Humans had never been accused of being logical or sensible. "Fleet-wide communication channel open, Admiral," Rodriguez reported. Chen activated her command frequency, knowing that her words would reach every human vessel in the system, every orbital defense platform around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies, every mining station and research facility that had chosen to stay and fight rather than flee. "This is Admiral Chen to all human forces," she began. "By now you all know what we're facing. The largest Devourer attack force in recorded history is heading our way. Every expert in the galaxy says we can't win. Every computer simulation shows our complete destruction within the first 6 hours of engagement." She paused, watching the tactical display as Devourer bioships continued their approach. Unlike the clean geometric vessels preferred by most galactic species, the Devourers looked exactly like what they were: living weapons grown rather than built, all organic curves and visible circulatory systems pulsing with bioluminescent energy. "They're probably right," Chen continued. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy that's been consuming civilization since before humans discovered agriculture. Any rational species would evacuate, regroup, and hope to fight another day." Throughout the fleet, human crews prepared their weapons, armed their missiles, and made final checks on equipment that was crude by galactic standards, but had already proven effective against Devourer bioforms. In the converted cargo ship Indomitable, Captain Jake Morrison watched his mixed crew of volunteers, mechanics, teachers, accountants, and retirees load ammunition into weapons they'd barely learned to operate. "But we're not any species," Chen's voice continued across all channels. "We're humans. We're the people who looked at the vast emptiness of space and decided to explore it. We're the descendants of individuals who faced impossible odds throughout history and chose to fight anyway. We're here because when the galaxy needed someone to stand up to the Devourers, we said yes." On Mars Station 7, Dr. Emily Watson put down her research data and picked up the assault rifle she'd trained with for the past month. Around her, civilian volunteers who had stayed behind to convert the research facility into a fortress continued their preparations. They knew the Devourers would target the orbital installations first, but someone needed to make them pay for every meter. "The aliens out there think we're crazy," Chen said, her voice carrying a note of pride that surprised even her. "They can't understand why we don't retreat, why we don't negotiate, why we're willing to die for worlds that aren't even our birth planet. They've spent centuries fighting smart, fighting efficiently, fighting to minimize casualties." The first wave of Devourer scouts appeared on the outer edge of sensor range, biomechanical creatures the size of destroyers that moved with predatory grace through the void. Human early warning satellites began broadcasting targeting data to the fleet's fire control computers. "They don't understand that we're not fighting to minimize casualties," Chen continued. "We're fighting to maximize damage. Every Devourer ship we destroy here is one that can't consume someone else's home. Every bioform we eliminate is one less weapon pointed at the galaxy's throat. We're not trying to survive this. We're trying to win it." The words reached human forces throughout the system and beyond. In the asteroid belt, mining crews had converted their industrial equipment into improvised weapons platforms. On the outer colony ships that couldn't reach Earth in time, volunteers prepared to launch themselves on intercept courses with Devourer stragglers. Every human installation, from the smallest research outpost to the massive orbital shipyards, had made the same choice: stand and fight. "Fire control," Chen called to her weapons officer. "Begin preliminary targeting on the leading bioships." "Aye, Admiral." "All batteries report ready." The Galactic Council fleet maintained their position at the system's edge, their sensors recording everything. Ambassador Zixathara watched from the Council ship Harmony as human vessels began moving into attack formation. Their tactics were unlike anything in military doctrine. Instead of maintaining safe engagement distances, they were closing to point-blank range. "They're going to ram," Admiral Kesavar observed from his command ship. "Look at their approach vectors. Half the fleet is positioning for collision courses." Dr. Melvin, observing from his research vessel, monitored human communications with growing fascination. Instead of the grim resignation he expected from soldiers facing certain death, the conversations were filled with dark humor, casual banter, and what humans called trash talk directed at their approaching enemies. On the destroyer Fury, Commander Lisa Park was briefing her crew when someone asked about their chances of survival. Survival? Park laughed. We're not here to survive. We're here to make the Devourers regret ever entering this system. Survival is for people who have something left to lose. The crew laughed, actually laughed, at their commander's words. Dr. Melvin made urgent notes about human psychological responses to extreme stress, but he was beginning to suspect that what he was witnessing wasn't stress response at all. It was something else entirely. Admiral Chen, came a transmission from the Galactic Council flagship. Our tactical analysis suggests your fleet could hold defensive positions around your outer planets, forcing the Devourers to divide their attention. You don't have to meet them head-on. Chen smiled as she replied. Respectfully, Ambassador, defensive positions are for people who want to defend something. We want to attack something. The Devourer main force was now clearly visible on all sensors, a dark cloud of bioships that blotted out stars as they approached. Their movement patterns showed the same predatory intelligence that had consumed hundreds of worlds, flowing around obstacles, probing for weaknesses, preparing to envelope and destroy everything in their path. They had never faced anything like the human defense fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Throughout the human fleet, engines ignited at full power as every vessel accelerated directly toward the approaching Devourer force. There was no formation flying, no attempt to maintain organized battle lines. Each ship chose its own target and attack vector, creating a chaotic assault pattern that no tactical computer could predict or counter. The Galactic Council observers watched in stunned silence as human warships opened fire while still accelerating, their weapons blazing at maximum rate without regard for ammunition conservation. When their missiles were exhausted, they continued firing energy weapons. When their energy weapons overheated, they rammed. The first collision occurred when the destroyer Relentless, her weapon systems destroyed by Devourer biopulse weapons, simply continued her attack run at full acceleration. The impact with a Devourer cruiser analog created an explosion visible from Earth, eliminating both vessels instantly. Relentless confirms kill, reported her final transmission. Going out in style. Similar scenes played out across the battle zone as human vessels traded their existence for Devourer bioships. The converted transport Valor, loaded with volunteers and improvised weapons, took concentrated fire from 3 Devourer attack forms. Instead of attempting evasive maneuvers, Captain Amy Foster ordered full power to engines and drove her ship directly into the center of the enemy formation. "This is Valor," came Foster's final transmission. "See you all in hell." The explosion took out all 3 Devourer ships and damaged 2 others. What terrified the Galactic Council observers, and apparently the Devourers themselves, wasn't the destruction, but the human response to it. Instead of mourning their losses or reconsidering their tactics, the remaining human forces seemed to become more determined, more aggressive, more willing to sacrifice everything for temporary advantage. "All ships, this is Defiance," Admiral Chen broadcast. "The Valor just showed us how it's done. Let's make them pay for every meter." The human assault continued with increasing intensity. Ships that should have retreated for repairs instead pressed forward until they were destroyed. Crews that should have ejected in escape pods instead stayed at their posts, manually controlling weapons when automated systems failed. When conventional weapons were exhausted, they used their ships as weapons. Dr. Melvin watched the battle unfold with growing understanding of something the galaxy had never encountered before. These weren't desperate last stands by cornered animals. This was a species that had fundamentally different concepts about victory, defeat, and acceptable cost. "They're not trying to survive the battle," he reported to his fellow observers. "They're trying to win the war. Each ship they destroy here is one less ship that can attack other worlds. They've calculated that their civilization's total annihilation is an acceptable price for eliminating this devourer force." The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships died by the dozens, but each took devourer bioforms with them. The larger human vessels focused on the enemy's command ships, accepting suicidal odds to eliminate devourer coordination. Smaller ships engaged in swarm attacks, overwhelming individual targets through sheer numbers and complete disregard for their own safety. Admiral Chen's flagship Defiance was hit repeatedly. Her armor stripped away, her weapons gradually failing, but she continued to fight, using the ship's mass as a battering ram when conventional weapons failed. Around her, the bridge crew maintained their posts despite decompression, toxic atmosphere, and the constant threat of explosion. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Rodriguez, blood streaming from a head wound, "the Galactic Council fleet is requesting permission to engage. They say the tactical situation has changed." Chen looked at her tactical display. Nearly half the human fleet was gone, but they had eliminated over 60% of the devourer force. The math was starting to work in their favor, but only because humans had been willing to accept losses that would have forced any other species to retreat. "Tell them they're welcome to join the party," Chen replied. "But we're finishing this ourselves." The remaining human ships pressed their assault with undiminished intensity. The carrier Washington, her flight decks crippled, launched her remaining fighters in waves that had no hope of return. Each pilot knew they were on a one-way mission, but they flew anyway, targeting devourer bioships with every weapon they carried before ramming into their targets. "This is Fighter Wing 7, came the transmission from Lieutenant Maria Santos as she lined up her final attack run. "Tell my family I love them and that we're winning." Her fighter struck a devourer command ship at full acceleration, her remaining missiles detonating on impact. The explosion created a chain reaction that eliminated 3 more enemy vessels. The battle's turning point came when Captain Thomas Bull Durham of the heavy cruiser Indestructible, his ship crippled but still functional, made a decision that violated every principle of military tactics. Instead of targeting individual enemy ships, he set course for the center of the remaining devourer formation and ordered his engineering crew to overload the ship's fusion reactors. "This is Captain Durham to all human forces," he broadcast as his ship accelerated into the heart of the enemy fleet. "Remember the Alamo. Remember Pearl Harbor. Remember that we chose to fight." The fusion detonation eliminated 17 devourer bioships and damaged dozens more. The remaining enemy force, reduced to fewer than 300 vessels and apparently stunned by the humans' willingness to sacrifice everything for tactical advantage, began to retreat. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. "All ships pursue and destroy," she ordered. "Don't let any of them escape." The surviving human vessels, numbering fewer than 200, immediately began pursuit. Ships barely capable of spaceflight pushed their damaged engines to maximum power, chasing down retreating devourers with the same relentless intensity they had shown in the initial assault. The Galactic Council observers finally moved to intervene, not to help the humans, but to prevent a massacre that threatened to eliminate the entire devourer force. Hundreds of advanced alien warships swept into the battlefield, targeting fleeing devourers with weapons far more sophisticated than anything in the human arsenal. "This is Admiral Kesavar to Admiral Chen," came the transmission from the Council fleet. "We're moving to support your pursuit. Please maintain current vectors and allow us to eliminate the remaining hostiles." Admiral Chen, standing on the bridge of her battered flagship, surrounded by the bodies of crew members who had refused to abandon their posts, looked at the tactical display showing alien ships efficiently destroying the last devourer bioforms. The battle was over. Humanity had won, but at a cost that would have destroyed any other species. Of the 847 ships that had begun the battle, fewer than 150 remained functional. Human casualties exceeded 60%, with some units suffering complete elimination. Any rational analysis would call it a catastrophic defeat. "Admiral," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from her damaged communications station, "the Galactic Council is requesting a formal after-action report. They want to understand our tactical doctrine." Chen considered the request. How do you explain to beings who have spent centuries minimizing casualties that some battles are worth any price? How do you describe to species that retreat when odds become unfavorable that sometimes the only victory is making your enemy pay so dearly they never want to fight you again? "Tell them we'll send our after-action report," Chen replied, "but they're not going to understand it." Around Earth, the surviving human forces began the grim work of rescue operations and casualty assessment. But even as they mourned their dead, there was something in their communications that chilled the Galactic Council observers: satisfaction. Despite their losses, despite their grief, the humans were pleased with the outcome. "We got them all," was the general sentiment. "Every last one." Dr. Melvin compiled his observations with growing unease. The humans hadn't just defeated the Devourer force, they had eliminated it completely, ensuring that none of the bioships could escape to threaten other worlds. They had achieved total victory through total commitment, accepting casualties that would have been unthinkable to any other species. But more disturbing was their attitude afterward. Instead of the trauma and horror he expected, the surviving humans displayed what they called grim satisfaction. They mourned their dead, but they celebrated their victory. They had achieved exactly what they set out to accomplish. Ambassador Zixathara watched the human ships returning to Earth, many of them barely spaceworthy, their crews exhausted but unbroken. She realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. A species had emerged that fought not to preserve itself, but to destroy its enemies. They didn't seek survival, they sought victory, regardless of cost. "What have we unleashed?" she whispered to herself, watching Admiral Chen's battered flagship limping toward home port. The answer, she suspected, was something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare forever. The humans had shown that some enemies could be defeated, but only by beings willing to pay any price for victory. And somewhere in the depths of space, other Devourer forces were receiving reports of the Sol system battle. For the first time in their species' history, they were learning what it meant to fear their prey. 3 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was a different place. News of humanity's victory had spread through every inhabited system, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who could barely believe the reports. A species barely 2 centuries spacefaring had achieved what 300 years of galactic military science said was impossible. They had not merely defeated a Devourer force, they had annihilated it completely. But the real changes were just beginning. Dr. Melvin stood in his research facility on Kepler Station, reviewing psychological profiles that defied everything xenopsychology had established about sentient behavior. The data streaming in from human colonies throughout their space showed patterns that should have indicated civilizational collapse. Instead, they showed the opposite. "Impossible," he muttered, checking the statistics again. Human military recruitment had increased by 400%. Civilian production of weapons and military equipment had expanded beyond anything their economy should have supported. Most disturbing of all, their casualty acceptance rates in subsequent smaller engagements with Devourer scouts had actually increased. They were becoming more aggressive, not less. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display activated, showing Admiral Kesevar's scarred reptilian features. The old warrior looked troubled, which was unusual for someone who had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries. "Dr. Melvin," the Admiral began, "I need your expertise. We have a situation developing in the Vega sector that requires immediate xenopsychological assessment." "What kind of situation?" Melvin replied, already pulling up star charts of the region. "The kind that involves humans volunteering for suicide missions," Kesevar said grimly. Again. The details, when they came, painted a picture that simultaneously impressed and horrified the Galactic Council. A moderate devourer force, perhaps 50 bioships, had been detected approaching the Vega colonies, home to several non-human species under Council protection. Standard protocol called for evacuation of non-essential personnel and deployment of Council fleet assets to conduct defensive operations. The humans had offered an alternative. "They want to handle it themselves," Admiral Kesevar explained. "A single human battle group, maybe 30 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels. They claim they can eliminate the entire Devourer force with minimal Council casualties." Dr. Melvin reviewed the force composition reports with growing alarm. The human fleet heading to Vega included merchant ships with improvised weapons, mining vessels converted to carry nuclear charges, and what appeared to be passenger liners loaded with volunteers. It was the kind of desperate improvisation that should have indicated hopeless circumstances. Except the humans weren't desperate. They were confident. "Admiral," Melvin said carefully, "have you reviewed their tactical plans?" "That's the problem," Kesevar replied. "They don't have tactical plans in any sense we would recognize. Their entire strategy appears to be get close and explode. But given their track record at Sol..." The unspoken implication hung between them. The humans had proven that their seemingly suicidal tactics could achieve impossible victories. The question was whether the galaxy was prepared for the broader implications of that success. On the human flagship Retribution, Captain Maria Santos, recently promoted after surviving the destruction of her fighter wing at Sol, briefed her combined fleet of military and civilian vessels. The cargo hauler Freedom's Price flew alongside the destroyer Vengeance, both preparing for an engagement their crews viewed as routine. "Intelligence reports 53 confirmed Devourer bioships," Santos announced to her mixed command crew. "Standard configuration, no super heavy units. They're targeting the Vegan agricultural worlds, probably looking to consume the terraforming infrastructure." Commander Jake Torres, captain of the converted freighter Liberty Bell, raised his hand. "Rules of engagement." "Captain?" Santos smiled, the expression that had become known throughout human space as a battle grin. "Same as always, Commander. No survivors. We eliminate every devourer in the system, regardless of cost." The casual way she said it sent chills through Dr. Melvin, who was monitoring the communications from his research ship. The humans discussed the complete elimination of an enemy force as if it were a routine maintenance task. More disturbing was the lack of any discussion about their own survival. It simply wasn't a factor in their planning. "Captain Santos," called Lieutenant Wilson from communications, "we're receiving a transmission from Council Fleet Command. They're offering support vessels and requesting coordination of attack vectors." "Tell them thanks, but no thanks," Santos replied. "This is our show. They can watch if they want, but we don't need backup for a standard Devourer patrol." Dr. Melvin made urgent notes about human linguistic patterns. They were referring to a force that could devastate multiple star systems as a standard patrol. The psychological implications were staggering. They had normalized warfare against galaxy-ending threats. The engagement at Vega lasted less than 3 hours. The human fleet approached the Devourer force, using the same tactics that had proven successful at Sol: direct assault, maximum aggression, complete willingness to sacrifice individual vessels for tactical advantage. But there were differences that Dr. Melvin found even more disturbing than their original methods. They were more efficient now, more organized. They had learned from their previous battle and refined their techniques for trading lives for maximum enemy destruction. The merchant ship Prosperity, loaded with volunteer civilians and improvised weapons, selected the largest Devourer bioship as her target. Instead of the desperate ramming attack that might have been expected, Captain Helen Rogers executed a precision maneuver that brought her ship alongside the enemy vessel before detonating nuclear charges at specific structural points. "This is Prosperity," came Rogers' final transmission. "Textbook kill. See you all on the other side." The explosion eliminated not only her target but damaged 3 nearby Devourer ships, creating opportunities for follow-up attacks by other human vessels. It was the kind of calculated sacrifice that required ice-cold tactical analysis combined with absolute willingness to die for strategic advantage. Throughout the battle, human communications remained casual, almost cheerful. Crews discussed their impending deaths with the same tone other species used for discussing weather. When the destroyer Courage lost main power and began drifting toward a cluster of Devourer attack forms, her captain's transmission was almost conversational. "This is Commander Park. Looks like we're going to ram whether we want to or not. Might as well make it count. Overloading reactors now." The resulting explosion eliminated 6 Devourer bioships. What truly shocked Dr. Melvin was the response from other human vessels. Instead of horror or grief, their communications showed satisfaction, even approval. They praised their comrades' good kills and clean sacrifices, as if evaluating athletic performances. "Excellent work, Courage," came the response from Captain Santos. "That's how it's done." By the end of the engagement, 22 human vessels had been destroyed, but the entire Devourer force had been eliminated. The mathematics were impossible by any conventional standard. A smaller force should not have been able to achieve total victory against a larger, technologically superior enemy. But the humans had done it through methods that no other species could even contemplate, much less execute. Dr. Melvin's real shock came during the aftermath, as surviving human crews conducted rescue operations and casualty assessments. Instead of the trauma and grief he expected, the humans displayed what they called professional satisfaction. They had accomplished their mission with acceptable losses. Acceptable losses that included nearly 70% casualties. The Galactic Council's emergency session following the Vega engagement was unlike any in recorded history. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss a single, terrifying question. What had they unleashed by supporting humanity? Ambassador Zixithara's bioluminescent patterns flickered with agitation as she reviewed the battle reports. "They're not fighting like any known species. They're fighting like weapons themselves." High Arbiter Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with deep concern. "The mathematical analysis is clear. Human tactics achieve superior results through inferior means. They consistently defeat larger forces by accepting casualty rates that would constitute genocide for any other species." Admiral Kesavar, his scarred hide bearing new marks from recent Devourer encounters, spoke with grudging admiration. "They've revolutionized warfare. Their methods are spreading throughout their space. Even civilian populations are adopting military thinking patterns." Dr. Melvin presented his psychological assessments with growing unease. The humans are experiencing collective psychological changes. They're developing what they call warrior culture, a societal structure that prioritizes military effectiveness over individual survival. It's unprecedented in galactic history. Counselor Trex's mandibles clicked nervously. "Are you saying they're becoming a warrior species?" "I'm saying they already are one," Dr. Melvin replied. "The transformation has been incredibly rapid. Their entire civilization is reorganizing around military principles. Education focuses on tactical thinking. Entertainment celebrates sacrifice for strategic advantage. Their mating patterns now favor individuals with military experience. The implications hit the assembled representatives like a physical force. Humanity wasn't just fighting the Devourers effectively, they were evolving into something the galaxy had never seen, a species optimized for warfare. High Arbiter Veltar's form shifted through colors, indicating deep philosophical conflict. 3 months ago, we faced extinction at the hands of the Devourers. Now we face the possibility that our salvation may be worse than our original threat. Ambassador Quillix's tentacles writhed with distress. What do we do? Humanity has proven they can defeat Devourer forces, but their methods threaten everything we consider civilized. The answer came from an unexpected source. A transmission reached the council chamber from Admiral Chen aboard the newly commissioned human flagship Eternal Vigilance. The vessel was larger and more heavily armed than any previous human ship, but what caught attention was its crew composition, entirely volunteers who had signed lifetime service contracts with humanity's military. Honored council members, Chen's image appeared in the chamber's holographic display. We're aware of your concerns about human military doctrine. We'd like to propose a solution that addresses your needs while allowing us to continue our mission. The proposal, when it came, was as elegant as it was terrifying. Humanity offered to serve as the galaxy's military arm against extragalactic threats. They would handle Devourer incursions, rogue bioweapons, and any other existential threats too dangerous for conventional forces. In exchange, they requested formal recognition as a council member species and access to advanced galactic technology. We're already doing this job, Chen explained with characteristic human directness. We might as well make it official. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some representatives argued that formalizing humanity's military role would create a dangerous precedent, a species whose entire civilization was dedicated to warfare. Others pointed out that humanity was already fighting these battles, and council recognition might provide some measure of control over their methods. The deciding factor came from an unexpected source. Long-range sensors detected massive Devourer fleet movements in the galactic rim, forces far larger than anything previously encountered, apparently massing for a coordinated assault on council space. The mathematics are clear, High Arbiter Veltar announced to the assembly. Conventional galactic military forces cannot defeat a coordinated Devourer assault of this magnitude. We need the humans. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone expected, but decisive enough to change galactic history. By a margin of 347 to 241, the Galactic Council voted to formally recognize humanity as a military protectorate species, a civilization whose primary function was the defense of council space against existential threats. The humans accepted immediately. 6 months later, Dr. Melvin published his final report on human psychological evolution. The data was disturbing, fascinating, and ultimately hopeful in ways that surprised even him. Humanity had indeed transformed into a warrior species, but not in the way anyone had feared. Instead of becoming aggressive toward other galactic species, they had developed an almost protective attitude toward what they called civilians, every other sentient species in the galaxy. Their military doctrine had evolved beyond simple sacrifice for victory tactics. They now fought with the calculated precision of a species that understood their role as the galaxy's shield against darkness. They accepted casualties not out of desperation or cultural death wish, but from cold mathematical analysis of what was necessary to protect others. Most remarkably, they had begun developing military technologies and tactics that actually reduced their own casualties while maintaining their tactical effectiveness. They were learning to win through superior strategy rather than superior sacrifice, though they retained their willingness to pay any price when necessary. The transformation was summed up in a message Admiral Chen sent to the Galactic Council after the successful elimination of another major Devourer incursion. We've realized something important. We're not fighting to die for you, we're fighting to live for you. There's a difference, and it matters. Dr. Melvin's final assessment was cautiously optimistic. Humanity has evolved into something unprecedented, a species that combines tactical ruthlessness with protective instincts. They are becoming the galaxy's guardians, willing and able to face threats that would destroy other civilizations. The price of their protection is accepting methods that challenge our understanding of civilized warfare, but the alternative is extinction. The report concluded with an observation that would define galactic politics for generations. When the universe produces monsters, sometimes the only defense is producing something even more monstrous. Humanity has become our monster, terrible in their capabilities, but fighting on our side. In the depths of space, Devourer command entities received reports of repeated defeats and began modifying their strategies. For the first time in their species' history, they were encountering prey that fought back effectively. They would need new approaches, new tactics, new understanding of warfare itself. But on Earth, in the military academies and training centers that now dotted the planet's surface, human instructors taught the next generation of warriors a simple truth that had become their civilization's defining principle. No matter how dark the galaxy gets, no matter what comes out of the void to threaten the innocent, remember this: we are the thing that monsters check under their beds for. The galaxy had found its guardians. They were terrible, beautiful, and absolutely dedicated to ensuring that civilization survived, no matter the cost to themselves. The stars themselves seemed safer, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, humans stood ready to pay any price for peace. And in the quantum foam between realities, other ancient threats that had slumbered for eons began to stir, drawn by the psychic resonance of a species that had chosen to fight rather than flee. But that, as they say, is another story.